Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to lecture 16. In this lecture, we will discuss the significance and the variety of urban reforms and its ULB's role for addressing those reforms. In the last lecture, we discussed about the various kinds of municipal systems and process improvement. In the last week, we discussed various aspects of organizational development. Now, in this week, we will discuss the how to improve the organizational effectiveness by using various methods. So, today we will discuss the urban reforms. Under this, we will discuss what is and why reform, domain of urban reforms, domain classification types, and concept of managing change to tackle the urban reform. So, let me tell you some background that when we discussed in few lectures that in urban governance from 1992 from the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, it is a huge responsibility to the municipalities to perform various kinds of activities including planning, development, service delivery, etc. And after that in 2004 onwards, there are reform linked urban development programs. For example, JNNURM and after that AMRUT, all the programs are reform linked. The objective behind this reform, to link the reform with the urban development scheme, was that if you provide much amount of finance to the urban local bodies without the accountability, without the mandate of improving their effectiveness so that they can deliver the service in a better way. It has been seen in last couple of decades after the independence that the average level of services is very poor, and as a result there are a lot of programs or schemes which failed even and in spite of spending much money. So, as keeping this in mind and considering this, Government of India in 2004 they brought a flagship program called Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, and this program was unique in form because it is a comprehensive program, because of this program all earlier smaller and theme based programs were stopped and it was merged with this program. And in this program it was essential to have some reform. That means if a municipality do some reform, then only they will get some funding for the development. So, that was the message. Now, what is reform? Reform is basically the organizational change and the actions required for the organizational change, and unless the organization change, they cannot perform better to have the reform. So, under this reform there are two types of reforms which are categorized. One is that mandatory reforms which has to be done compulsorily, and without that not a single amount of money will be disbursed, and second was the optional reform, which some of the optional reforms has to be done, but it is up to the government that how many reforms they can take up based on their context, based on their convenience. And secondly, there were two levels of the reforms. Some reforms were required to be done by the state level, some reforms were required to be done at the urban local bodies level. So, as a urban professionals, as a city manager, you must know what kind of reforms, and what is their implications. So, let us see one by one. So, we discussed that two types of reforms were there, mandatory reforms and optional reforms, and both the reforms were there at ULB level and state level. So, let us see what are the reforms at the urban local bodies level and the which are mandatory. So, first reform was that the adoption of the double entry system of the accounting. In municipalities since municipalities and the urban local bodies, they are not a very large organizations like any state department or the directorate or any public sector undertaking. So, their accounting was earlier classically was done manually by single entry system. So, the message through this reform was that if they go to double entry system, their asset and liability both will be counted and they will be in a better position to assess and to appreciate the assets and liability, and the accounting system will be transparent. We will discuss this part in much more details in some module where we will discuss the finance and accounts part in detail. So, I am not going into that detail, but this is a very essential reform which was there in under JNNURM. Then e-governance. In e-governance, using GIS and MIS for various services, e-governance basically provides or facilitates any service by using electronic media. For example, there are online building plan sanctioning, there could be online submission of the taxes, online submission of the license and its application, online conversion of the building plan of the land use. So, so many activities are there which can be done electronically, and slowly it is coming up, and many municipalities or corporations are there who have done excellent in e-governance and using GIS and MIS, Geographic Information System and Municipal Information System, for improving their delivery of the services. Third is the reform in the property tax with GIS. Now, earlier the property tax was calculated case to case basis, house to house basis or property to property basis. Now, it was cumbersome and it was huge in terms of the manpower and the time consumption. So, message was that if it can be done on a unit area basis, if it can be done using some simplified method, so that the property taxing become easier for the municipal staff, it can be transparent for the citizens, and it can be effective in terms of timely delivery of the property taxation and its collection. So, that was the reform. Then levy of reasonable user charges. Now, in our local government, we have been giving services like water supply, we have been collecting the solid waste and the other waste, we have been providing the essential services like licensing and all the services, but can you charge some amount of user charge for the water supply or similar services? You have been doing the cleaning of the roads and cleaning of the common areas, public areas. Now, usually people do not charge money for that, but the absolute service which you are using in your premises, can municipality charge a nominal amount of money? For example, for giving water supply to the family, it takes like 400 to 500 liter per family. So, can municipality charge a very nominal amount like rupees 50 or rupees 20 or rupees 100? So, that was the essence. In our country, there is a common notion that that people see user charge as a tax. So, when you say that okay, a nominal amount of tax will be required, so people will see it as tax. So, challenge was that whether the municipality can convince and can appreciate the people that to appreciate the service delivery and give some amount of user charge. So, that the objective of taking user charge was that whether so that municipality can sustain the infrastructures and sustain the service in a continuous basis. Then it was the internal earmarking within local bodies and budget, so that they can provide basic services for the urban poor. Now, if a municipality spends 100 rupees for on a particular budget, how much money is used actually for the poor? Is there any earmarking? Is there any bracketing of that fund? So, it was told that some amount of money in the tune of 20-30% has to be earmarked, has to be devoted for the urban poor to provide the basic services. That was one of the very important mandatory reforms at the urban local bodies level. Next, let us see the mandatory reforms at the state level. The first reform which is important here is this implementation of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act. Even though in 1992 74th Constitutional Amendment Act came into force, but after even 10 years municipalities could not do all the changes or the suggestions given by the 74th Amendment. So, it was told in this reform league programs that if that for state level organizations, every state government has to frame their municipal acts and delegate all the functions to the municipalities as per the prescription of the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, and including the DPC and MPC, District Planning Committee and Metropolitan Planning Committee. You must be knowing that the Metropolitan Planning Committee and District Planning Committee are not at all formed in various states and various districts. So, it was very much mandatory that state government has to form the MPC and DPC to streamline the planning at the regional scale. That was a important and mandatory reform at the state level. Next is the repeal of Urban Land Ceiling and Regulation Act. Now, I hope that you know little bit about this act, Urban Land Ceiling. The objective of this Land Ceiling Act was that to have a ceiling or the cutoff for the urban land for individual ownership. You know that land reform was there in rural area in 70s and 80s, and as a result of that, in rural areas the large chunk of land which was there under the ownership of the jamindars or the landlords were distributed evenly to the farmers, to the agricultural laborers. So, government thought some time back that if we can do the same thing for the urban areas, so they made a ceiling for the land area. In some areas it is like 500 square meter. So, you have, if you have say 2000 square meter of land in urban area, you cannot have 500 more than 500. So, remaining land will be vested to government, and government can use that land for the public infrastructure. Now, the problem is, if the ceiling is there, government was not able to generate large amount of chunk in one place. There are land, but in a segregated or distributed place. So, it is very challenging to get a land in a unified space. That is why government tried to withdraw or repeal that Land Ceiling and Regulation Act, and it was made mandatory for the state government, because land is a state subject, as you know. Second was the reform of Rent Control Act, Rent Control Laws and Acts, which balancing the interest of the landlords and the tenants. There are rent control acts in various states which are basically draconian, and it does not help the tenants or the landlords to have their own right, and as a result the rental housing as a subject has been neglected in our country, and the rent control acts were, because of one reason was that Rent Control Act. So, government thought that why not we revise the Rent Control Act, so that landlords and tenants, both of them get their legitimate right, and the rental housing become successful in our country. So, that was another mandatory reform. The next one was the rationalization of the stamp duty. Objective was to bring it down not more than 5% within next 5 years. So, you know that whenever you purchase any house or land or any apartment, you need to spend some amount of money for the registration of that property, which is done under some government registration department, and they usually take 7 to 8% of the stamp duty. Sometimes it is more than that. So, the reform, the objective of this reform was that the poor people cannot give that much of money. So, if there is a system of reducing that level, and if there can be a system of making a various levels of the stamp duty, for poor it can be less, for the higher income group it can be little more. So, those kind of reform could be there at the state level. There are few more mandatory reforms at the state level, like independent regulators for the urban services. In some of the state level organizations for the urban services like water supply, solid waste management, sanitation, there can be independent regulatory organization which will monitor and regulate the activities of the municipalities and the service provision. Then the public disclosure law and release of quarterly performance information to all the stakeholders. Now, public disclosure law is basically by and large the set of laws which enables or which makes the mandate to disclose the essential information for the common citizen. In some lecture we discussed Right to Information Act. So, under this act, every municipality and the state government has to disclose their information under this provision of the law. Enactment of community participation law to institutionalize citizens participation. In some lecture we discussed various levels of citizens participation. So, under this community participation law, it is essential and state government has to ensure that community participations law is done and enacted in the state, so that each and every municipal body and the not only municipal body, the other local bodies including panchayat, they make it essential and mandatory for the community participation in their all planning and development work. Then assigning or associating elected urban local bodies with city planning function. You must have seen that in 74th Amendment Act, the first job which is given in 12th schedule out of 18 job, that is a city planning function, but practically very less number of urban local bodies could perform that function because of the less amount of funding, less capacity in terms of the manpower for that. So, state government has to ensure that urban local bodies have essential manpower and funding to do the city planning function, and more importantly they have to delegate that function through their municipal act. So, as a result of this mandatory reform, most of the state governments now they have delegated the power, but the reality is that because of the less amount of capacity at the local level, they are still not able to perform full planning function. Some of the state governments they have tried to give the manpower in terms of the urban planning professional in the municipalities, but it is required to create a common cadre of urban planning or city planning if it is delegated to the municipality, and that can be streamlined through the municipal service commission. That is a bigger agenda although, but it is very important to note at this function at this point that delegating responsibility and function is one thing, and second is enabling and improving their capacity is also required to perform that responsibility. So, next we discuss the optional reform. Apart from the mandatory reform, there are some optional reforms which can be done by the state and urban local bodies level, like the revision of the bylaws to streamline the approval process. For any approval like say building plan, can there be any approval process which enables the approval within 15 days? I am just asking. I hope you know that in your municipality or in your organization it take more than 1 month or 2 months. Now, if all the paperwork are all right and it is listed in the citizens charter, and if it is done by the party, and can it be done within 15 days? Can the process be streamlined so that it can be prompt? So, those kind of reforms was the optional. Then simplification of the legal and the procedural framework for the conversion of the land. Currently, the people in an urban area, if they want to convert the land use, they not only have to consult the municipal authority, they have to go to the land registration department for the conversion of the land. But for the urban land, unless it is delegated to the municipality also to regulate the land in terms of the conversion, it is very difficult for a common citizen. So, it is the responsibility of the state government to streamline even the conversion of the land and delegate that power to the municipal authority. Then property title certification system in urban local bodies. When you have a property, when you have a land in a municipal municipal area, you apply to municipality for the mutation. It is called mutation. That means the property is registered on your name, but that system could be also streamlined using essential regulation. Then earmarking 20 to 35% the developed land for EWS and LIG housing. Now, earlier we in the last few slides we told that earmarking of the budget for the poor people is essential. Here they are also telling that not only budget, land as essential resource, you have to earmark 20 to 25% of the land for the EWS and LIG housing. So, please take a note, some of the state government they have done this also. Then computerized process for registration of land and property, then revision of the bylaws so that the strategies like rainwater harvesting, groundwater recharging, that can be done, and bylaws for the reuse of recycled water. So, there are few more optional reforms like administrative reform. Administrative reform means time to time government can do the administrative reform. The objective of the administrative reform is to see the whole administrative structure of the government at the state level, state, district, subdivisions, and the tehsil, block and the municipal level, and even lower level, and time to time suggest few recommendations and changes in the structure, so that the overall government and overall governance structure can work in a better way. For example, there are 2 to 3 administrative reform commissions which were set by the various government, but some of them were not properly implemented. So, it is also important to have the administrative reform, to make the commission, have the report, and to implement those the suggestions and the recommendations of the committees. There could be some structural reform in terms of the organizational structure and the system in the local government. Then encouraging private public partnership. After 2000, there are various municipalities who have been successful for PPP project in housing, in road, and also in other infrastructure like say solid waste management and say sanitation. So, how the concept of PPP and practice of PPP can be encouraged and can be made a kind of a practice or a culture in the municipality, that is also subject matter of the state planning state government, and unless the state government do not make this a practice and the culture in the whole state, it is very difficult at the local level to do something. So, now in the current times, most of the state government, they have their own PPP policy and the rules, so that the urban local bodies they can collaborate with the private sector and they can perform better in terms of the municipal infrastructure. Then national steering group may, apart from all this mandatory and the optional reform, there can be any other reforms which time to time government of India through their respective departments can institutionalize. So, that is the message. So, after this reform, now what was the effect of the reform or the outcome of the reform in India? Please take a note that the first impression of this reform was good, because there are various changes which happened in the urban local bodies, which is definitely positive and good in terms of their performance. For example, most of the municipalities now at least understand and appreciate the essence of town planning and city planning. They understood that if they plan, if they make a proper organizations of the whole project and they see the future of the municipality and the urban local bodies or their city, it is better that they reduce the wastage, they can have more projects, they can prioritize the project in a better way and they can reach to the people. That is number one. Number two, through the accounting reform, municipalities, they have been able to bring transparency and accountability and better performance, better efficiency in their accounting system. Third, in terms of the disclosure in the RTI Act and the Citizens Charter, they have been able to reach people with more accountability and more transparent services. Similarly, some of the municipalities and corporations, they have been also able to institutionalize few user charge. Most of the state government, they have repealed the Land Ceiling and Development Land Ceiling Act, and as a result more land is now available in the urban area. So, these are some of the major outcome and the achievement in the urban reforms agenda which took place from 2004 to the current date. And but apart from that, there are few lacunas also. There are few reforms which need constant following up and constant persuasion by the state government and central government, so that at the end of the day it is performed. So, instead of making too many organizations at the state level, it is very important to strengthen the capacity of the urban local government and the urban local bodies, so that they can concentrate on the reform and the change, so that they can perform better and better. So, how they can do that? So, there is a concept of managing change. If you want to bring some organizational change in terms of reform in the organization, it is also important that to manage that change in an organization through some dedicated and structured way of management and administration. So, that is a very important concept, although in the management, but now it is also applicable in the urban local bodies and their governance. So, we will discuss this concept of managing change in more detailed manner, and we will show you some examples that how the principles of managing change was done or adopted in the municipalities and better result was there. And as a result, the functionaries and the technical persons, and more importantly the municipal elected representative, if they can get some amount of ideas about the managing change, they can definitely manage their municipal function and ward level function, and they can streamline and they can steer the change in the urban local bodies, our cities will be bright and beautiful and the green. So, we will discuss this concept of managing change to steer the urban reform in the urban areas in the next lecture. So, with this I thank you very much for attending this lecture.